morning and welcome everybody to my first podcast. One of the things I learned the hard way when I started my YouTube channel in the very beginning was the importance of sound. Many of you let me know early on that some of the videos, the sound quality was not great, and I tried several cheap microphones. Basically ended up realizing you can't, if you're going to have a podcast, and certainly if you're going to do videos and stuff, the one thing you can't skimp on is sound quality. I put off the podcast because podcast is basically all sound, even though they're, as you can see me, I am recording the video with it. It's still a forum that's meant to be listened to, not necessarily watched so much. And I really wanted to make sure that I had something of quality sound so that it didn't sound terrible. I did go out and I'll show you what I got for those that are watching on video. I did break down, I got one of these. This is a Shure MV7 Plus podcast kit, and we'll see how this goes. So hopefully this does pretty well. I did have a microphone before from years ago, and I was never happy with the quality. It just didn't sound great. So that's how we got to the new microphone finally, and decided to go ahead and do the podcast. Now that we have that out of the way, my goal here is to dive into topics a little more broadly and cover some subjects that fit better into a podcast format rather than demo videos or me showing how I'm sharpening something or how to convert something. Because there's a lot of things that we can get into for those of you out there that want to have sharpening businesses or laser engraving businesses that I think are worth hearing, but I think just fit better in this type of format of a podcast as opposed to videos, which tend to be very, topic oriented, and you want to kind of stay on that topic and not be all over the place. So that's kind of the goal here today. So what I'm looking to get into today, let's first talk about entering the sharpening market. So you're brand new, you want to have a sharpening business, you want to enter the marketplace. How do you do that? What's the smart way to go about entering that marketplace? And what's some things that I think are not a great way to enter the marketplace? When I first entered the sharpening market, the first thing I did was I looked to see, who was the local competition? Who was going to be my competitors out there? What were they charging? What kind of services were they offering? How would my pricing compare to their pricing? Where did I want to enter the market in pricing? When I looked at that community, I did research online. I wanted to see, what customers were looking for in the area. All those kind of little things kind of helped shape what eventually I guess became a business strategy for entering that sharpening market. Now, one crucial thing to remember is the importance of being flexible as you enter this new marketplace. Now, why do I say that? And it's just from my experience. When I entered the marketplace, what I initially thought my business was going to be, it ended up being actually quite different in the end. And now that we're a few years down the road, it's significantly different. So you want to think about, who are your clients going to be? Are your clients going to be restaurants? Are your clients going to be salons and hair sharpening and scissors? Are your clients going to be predominantly residential customers with their home knives? And when I entered the market, my initial thought, and a lot of it came from a book that I read by Kyle Kaplan, I thought I was going to drive to my customers, collect their knives, bring them back, sharpen them, And I quickly found out that that was not the right fit for me. Like, really quickly found out. I hated the time I was spending on the road traveling to different locations. I really despised the time that was wasted when I was focusing on restaurants. Now, when we think about restaurants, right, a lot of us think it's a steady supply of work, right? They're going to need knives sharpened on a pretty regular basis. And that may be a great clientele for some people. And it might be for you. So the other thing I always like to remind everybody is you don't have to mimic what I do exactly. What might work for me may not work in your area. And that's why doing your research, finding out what you want to do as a sharpener and how you want your business to be is really important. And the sooner you find that out, the quicker you will be able to narrow down and focus your business on exactly you want that to be. But for me, like I said, I found out pretty quickly. I didn't like the time spent traveling. I really despised waiting for managers to come cut me a check at the restaurants, and it always seemed to be, so the manager's not in yet, he'll be in a half hour. So I just found myself, I'm wasting time dealing with these restaurants, and I had so many residential customers back at my house that I still had knives to sharpen, that over time what worked best for me was I realized, you know what, I'm not doing this. I let my restaurant customers kind of fade out, and I focused more on residential work and people that were willing to come to me and drop the knives off to me. And that kept me from having to drive around, deal with the ridiculous amounts of traffic that are here in the Northern Virginia area. And I was able to not see actually any dip in my business at all. In fact, I started making even more money because I wasn't wasting time going out there and having to collect knives and try and drum up more business that way. Now, like I said, that's not a bad model, though. For some people, and depending where you're at, it could be an excellent model. If you don't have lots and lots of people that are willing to come to you, you might need to go to your clientele. You might want to do that and be the person that consistently, once a month goes in and swaps knives out for that local restaurant. That might be a fantastic source of consistent revenue for you. But for me and my area where I was, that just wasn't meant to be, and it wasn't what I wanted to do. And once I moved on from that strategy, things just got even better for me, and that was what I did. Now, keep in mind, there's lots of ways to sharpen. So, what might be appealing to you might be mobile sharpening. Maybe you want to be working out of a van that you customize. Maybe you want to go to farmers markets and, different craft shows and things like that and set up and just sharpen and be on the go. I mean, I think it would be a really cool idea if my wife was retired. I think that would be a cool way to travel, to have maybe a really cool Aerostream set up with a sharpening area in it and just travel the country and go to different, markets and outside things and farmers markets and see the world and sharpen knives along the way. And you could do well, it's definitely a market. So keep that in mind. Like, think a lot about what is it and how exactly do you want your business to be? And that's a really important thing to focus on in the beginning. And the sooner you narrow that down, you will, be able to focus on all the other stuff. So now let's talk about pricing. And this is a huge important topic area to get into, and it's a trap that I see a lot of new sharpeners fall into. So one of the mistakes a lot of people make when they enter the sharpening market, especially if they have competition. Now, if you have no competition, it's not really going to be that big of a deal. But if you have competition, I think one of the biggest mistakes that you can make is trying to undercut everybody. And this was one thing I didn't do, and I had learned this from other businesses and things that I was involved in, what we call like a race to the bottom. You know, if you are like, oh, I'm going to undercut everybody, I'm going to be the least expensive, a lot of times the mindset's really easy to think like, oh, everyone's going to come to me and they're going to stop going to Bob up the street because, you know, oh, he's charging $2 more a knife or $5 more a knife. Don't get in the race to the bottom. It's a recipe, in my opinion, for disaster. If you think, oh, I'm going to go in and undercut everybody. And I'll just give you an example. One of the members of the Guild of Professional Sharpeners, a guy named Matt, who runs Potomac Sharpening, I remember when Matt entered the market. And you would technically say that Matt and I are in the same market. We're in this DC, Northern Virginia metro area. Matt's only, I think, 17 miles from me. Now, here's the difference, which will be different for all of you out there. 17 miles where I live can be an hour and a half drive. So we are literally, you know, a stone's throw away from each other. If you were out in the country, if you're out in rural America, you know, 17 miles for some people is a trip to the grocery store. So 17 miles, depending on the demographics in your area, may be a very short distance, maybe a very long distance. It's a short distance here, but one of the problems here in Alexandria and Maryland and DC is, you know, I'll give you an example. My wife, her office building's 10 miles from here. There's times it takes her 45 minutes to an hour to come home because of traffic. When you enter that marketplace, people are still looking at the pricing. So with Matt being right across the river from me, his pricing would affect me depending on how he entered the market. And I really thought it was great. Matt actually copied like almost my entire website when he entered the marketplace. He copied my pricing. I mean, exactly what I was charging, he was charging. And I think he might even been a little bit concerned, like, oh, is he going to be upset with me? And I wasn't at all. I was actually happy that he didn't go in and just undercut everybody. And I tried not to do the same thing. When I first entered the sharpening market, there was a business that had been established for about 17 years at the time, which was District Cutlery, who had been here forever. And that was one thing that I did. I went in and I took a look to see what their pricing was, you know. And I honestly, I figured like these guys are the best. They've been doing it for almost 20 years now. I'm going to try and get in the same market they're at. What's their pricing? But I didn't want to undercut them, and I wanted my pricing to be, you know, the same or in the same general area. I didn't want to be too cheap. I didn't want to I didn't want to be the discount sharpening guy. For me, around here, that's the farmers markets, guys. If someone doesn't want to pay what I'm charging for sharpening, they can take it to one of the numerous farmers markets that we have around here, because there are a few, and there's some sharpeners that show up at those. I didn't want to do that. I knew that I didn't want to be that guy either, but I also didn't want to hurt the local competition. I didn't want to hurt their pricing. So when I entered, I tried to match District Cutlery's sharpening prices. Now, he does a lot of things. We do things very, very differently. He's very specialized when it comes to hand sharpening Japanese knives and restoring Japanese knives. I don't do any of that. He's an expert, you know, and you can go and check out his prices and what he gets for doing that, you know, and that is a lot of work. All of my sharpening is like Tormek machines, 1x30s, guided sharpeners like a TS Prof, but I don't do any hand sharpening of Japanese knives. And that's where I also wanted to say, like, it's okay to have a good relationship with your competition. So my competition is District Cutlery, but you know what? A lot of the stuff that District Cutlery sells and a lot of these nice Japanese knives that I do sharpen, I got, and I have these customers because these are customers that have bought knives there and then but come to me to sharpen them. So I don't badmouth them. They're a member of the guild, and I've learned a lot from them. But it was kind of funny to me, and this was a real eye-opener too when I first got into the market. You know, I didn't want to have bad relations with anybody around me. I wanted to know, you know, what everybody did, how they did them. How could I separate myself from District Cutlery and other sharpeners in the area? The one thing that was really different between me and District Cutlery was they sold knives. I have no inventory. I don't sell knives. I didn't even want to sell knives. I had no interest in selling anything at the time other than my services. I still run my business that way. I am a service-oriented business. So I focused on that. I wanted to have a knife sharpening service. When I was in my old shop, which you guys have saw was a one-car garage, I couldn't have sold knives even if I wanted to. I had no room for inventory, display cases, any of that kind of stuff. My location was good for people finding me, but it certainly wasn't a location that would have been good for people to come in and buy knives. The other thing for me that was different than District Cutlery, who has employees and is an actual brick and mortar store, I didn't want that. You know, I have never wanted employees. I have always wanted to work for myself. I have avoided that. You know, I have considered it at times, but it was even, believe it or not, it was District Cutlery's meeting at the Guild of Sharpeners, listening to them talk about the difficulties of having employees. You know, lessons that they learned from having employees. After seeing them and talking to them, I decided, you know what? I'm not going down that road at all. I don't want employees. I'll find a way to regulate the amount of work, and I'll explain to you guys how I did do that in the end. But I have always avoided having employees. I don't want to train my next competitor either, and that's something you have to keep in mind too. If you're training some young kid to, you know, come in and sharpen, and he decides, you know what, I'm going to go do this myself now that I'm really good at it, you might have just trained local competition that you maybe don't want to have that close to your business. I know for District Cutlery, one of the things that was eye-opener for me is they've kind of learned that the hard way too, and they went back to them doing the sharpening and trying to get people to sell knives for them. Now, because they have a brick and mortar store, and that DC area where I'm in is expensive, they kind of have to sell knives to be able to pay the rent and stuff like that. And that's an interesting thing, you know, like when we talk about guys like Cliff Curry, who I'm, you know, friends with, and many of you guys are kind enough and often be like, hey, you know, Paul, I follow you, I follow Cliff. Cliff and I have very different business models to some extent. You know, Cliff's done the mobile thing for a long time. So if you go back and you watch Cliff's early videos, he did a lot of farmers market things, and that's one thing I love about my business. And one of these things I want to get into in the podcast is, you know, talking about how I went from being a police officer, where you kind of, you know, see people at their worst. You talk to people when you're on the job and stuff, but, you know, it's not, you know, you're not making friends and finding out about your clients that you're serving when you're a cop so much, because pretty much when people are calling you, it's usually not the greatest situations going on in their lives. And that's been one of the really enjoyable things for me when I got into the knife sharpening, and is meeting my clients. I love talking to the vets that come in, and I got a lot of law enforcement that come in and see me. I love seeing these guys and talking to them and being able to talk about things in an environment that's conducive to that and learning them. And I wanted to differentiate myself from the other sharpeners in the area. I focused very much on customer service, having a fantastic reputation of being an excellent sharpener, like right out of the gates. I truly wanted to be known as the best knife sharpener. Like, that's what I wanted. That was my goal. People are like, wow, like, best knife sharpening service in Alexandria, Virginia, DC area, metro area. That was my goal. So I set out for 5-star reviews and to be that guy. So if it meant, sometimes doing a little bit extra for my clients, do I do that? I do, and that was what I wanted to be. I didn't want to be the market sharpener. I didn't want to be the restaurant sharpener. I wanted to be that local guy that could sharpen just about anything you brought to him, but he was the best. He was known for being that best guy. And then as I went down the road and got a good clientele and got a good following, I also wanted to do some other things, and some other things interested me. And I've told the story many times about how I got into the laser engraving. Was a CEO of a company, and I've said to you guys, like, we have a lot of people in this area, and some of them are quite wealthy. And I had a CEO come in. He wanted 150 knives engraved for his, bosses around different divisions around his company that were all over the country. And I had no way to do that. I didn't laser engrave. It hadn't even really it wasn't even really a thought that had entered my mind. That's what brought it to my attention a few years ago. And so I looked at it, kept looking at it, and eventually, and I've talked about it many times before, that the prices of lasers came down, their abilities went up, and I jumped in and got into the laser engraving. I was the first sharpener that was also offering laser engraving services in this area. That was how I went about setting myself kind of apart from my competition, and it is branched out into really almost two separate businesses, because what I thought was going to be just laser engraving knives has turned into laser engraving tumblers and laser engraving rocks, which I just did this week, and I'm going to tell you the cool story with those. But it also goes back to just being able to talk to your customers and have cool things happen. Knives, of course, was the obvious one. Cutting boards, coasters. I mean, and every week it's different things and new things. Some of them have been for just advertising my business. I do all my business cards that way now. They're laser engraved business cards. I do it as gifts and thank yous for people. It's been a fun way to have two businesses that complement each other, grow, and it was one of those things that kind of separated me from the others in the industry. Now, keep in mind too, people are going to copy what you do. I recently noticed that one of my top competitors out there is offering laser engraving. Did I get upset about it? Did I get mad about it? No, not at all, because it's also a competitor that isn't that close to me. To kind of hit on this point a little bit, one thing I laughed about, when I entered, I was so concerned, like, am I going to hurt District Cutlery? I didn't want to hurt anybody's business, because, like, also I'm a retired police officer with a pension. So I did this because I wanted something to do. I wanted extra money to make, but I didn't want to have employees. And I certainly didn't want to hurt any other small businesses. So I wanted to get along with everybody and them do well, me do well. I remember the first time at the Guild of Professional Sharpeners when the guys from District Cutlery were there. They didn't even know I existed, and I had been sharpening now for 3 years, had a lot of customers. I had a very well-established sharpening business, and he was like, You're where? You're in Alexandria, Virginia? We're literally like 9 miles apart from each other, and he didn't even know I existed. So obviously, the great thing about that was it showed me that the potential for sharpening in this area was just wide open. We had enough business that I'd been in business for 3 years, and he didn't even, obviously didn't even know I was there. Wasn't going online saying like, why are we not getting enough sharpening business? He wasn't doing that, and then saw like, oh, this guy opened up right across the river from me. So that was kind of cool. I was kind of happy to see that, like, hey, I didn't hurt the competition around here. A lot of times competition is good, and I recommend them all the time now. And when people ask me like, hey, Paul, can you recommend a great Japanese knife, or where can I get a good Japanese knife, or where, I send them to District Cutlery because these guys are experts in it. They are absolute experts when it comes to Japanese knives. They have gone over to Japan. They have established relationships with people, and they bring in beautiful, high quality Japanese knives. If I had to buy a Japanese knife, that's where I'd go. I would be going over to District, Cutlery to get a Japanese knife. So that's where I send them. Now, and I do have some other relationships too. So when it comes to, I've mentioned before the hardware store that I have a great relationship with. It's a mile up the road. They are a Wüsthof dealer. So if people are looking for German cutlery or Wüsthof knives, that's where I send them. Because I don't keep them in here. I recently did some carving knives that a lady wanted engraved. She said, where can I get a nice carving knife? I sent her to my local hardware store who recommends me. They told her, he can engrave the knife for you. So that she bought the knife there and brought it here to be engraved, which I think is great. So we're all benefiting that way. So all of these local places benefit, and so it's okay to have a good relationship with them. When I entered the market, there was only one person that was upset with me. There was a sharpener that's about 3 miles from me, and he was definitely not happy, and we kind of knew each other from next door. I was a little naive at the time when I first started and was getting ready to open my business. He had opened a group on Nextdoor that was basically said like, it was like a sharpeners like club. I thought it was other people interested in sharpening like I was at the time. So I joined up. What I didn't realize at the time was it was really a way for him to get he didn't want to pay Nextdoor for advertising his business, which I kind of thought was, a little silly because Nextdoor is one of the most affordable ways to advertise a local business. Like I did do some advertising on there in the beginning. I didn't have to for long, but it cost me like $20 to go out to thousands of people in a it's an interesting way to advertise because you can focus on zip codes, and I was able to focus on my immediate area. And I haven't done any paid advertising in years. I'll tell you right now, I do. The only thing I keep up to date is my Google business listing. That's where I get 99% of my customers come from there, and word of mouth. In the beginning, it doesn't hurt if if you're just first getting started and nobody knows your website, no one knows anything. It's not bad to do a little bit of paid advertising. And I did do a little bit on Yelp and I did a little bit on Nextdoor, but eventually I was able to stop doing that. But what I ended up finding out was he had started this just as a way to kind of get around doing paid advertising. So what I did was I just backed away totally. I was posting like things that I had sharpened and realized like, oh, he's doing this because he just wants people to know that he has a sharpening business. So I left the group. I stopped even advertising on Nextdoor. I just totally backed away from it and said, you know what, that's his thing. He wants to advertise there. He wants to pretend he has a sharpening group as a way to advertise. Fine, you can have it. And didn't concern me at all. I just backed away from it altogether and focused on other things. Like I said, in a short period of time, I realized I don't think he affects me at all. We're 3 miles away and there's still that much business in this area. Now, I can't say that's the same for everybody, but in this densely populated area of Northern Virginia, close to Washington, D.C., we could easily, I think, handle even more sharpeners in the area. I don't think it would hurt my business. If someone opened up down the street, I don't think it would hurt the clientele and business that I've already established and built and have going out there. Just know that the competition's not a bad thing. Now, I even recommend him to people because there's things that, and he's great. He has been sharpening for 30 years, like even longer than me, but he does a lot of like knife building and making things. He's very good at making custom handles and things like that. I'm so busy with sharpening and laser engraving that when people come in and want like a handle put on a knife, which I was doing for a while, I pretty much send them to my competitor up the road and let him have that because I don't need it. And hopefully that's a way that we still manage to have positive relations. I don't think he's ever sent anybody to me, but I have sent several people to him with stuff that I know that he does just from having followed him for years. I also don't like sharpening swords. I don't like, I don't do paper cutters. And I know he does paper cutters. And so when people call me and they're like, they have a paper cutter or certain things that I know that he does, I send them to him. And it hasn't hurt my business at all. In fact, many of those customers thank me. Oh, wow, that's so awesome that you would refer me to somebody else. And I have had people that I've sent to him for sharpening that have come back with laser engraving. I think the best approach is always try and be friendly with your competitors if you can. And if they copy you, don't be offended. Like I said, someone's now doing laser engraving of knives too. I think it's awesome. Good. Hopefully you got questions, they can ask me. We are definitely not in, such close proximity to each other that it's definitely not hurting my laser engraving business at all. And I still think like this area, which is always listed in like the top side gigs that you can start to make money on the side, which is knife sharpening, not necessarily laser engraving, but I think that is a great thing that you can do too if you want to have your own business. It's wide open. I mean, generally, that's kind of how I feel about it. I just think that, there's lots of room in most places for people to do that and not have to have an adversarial relationship with your competition. So just think about that when you enter your market. Just to reiterate some of the things from earlier, don't worry about, don't be cutthroat, don't be the lowest guy, don't get in a race of pricing to the bottom. It's a big mistake and you'll be better off not doing that. So one of the rewarding aspects is, for me at least, is being able to talk to customers. As I mentioned earlier, I love being able to talk to people, whether it's veterans coming in. I would love to interview. I've mentioned before, you guys saw in a video, Justin Lake had come in here. He's a pretty well-known Navy SEAL. And, if I had had a well-established podcast then, I probably would have, interviewed Justin. But it's also just getting, cool little stories and things to tell about what happens with your business. I just got into laser engraving rocks. I have an uncle that died a year ago this February. He's buried up in Arlington. Fantastic uncle, was a role model for me in so many things in life. I miss him a ton, and we all miss him. He died too young. He was only in his 70s, and I had really hoped, that same year I had lost my mom, and the year before I had lost my father. I had really hoped that he would be around for a good another 20 or 30 years, being that he was my mom's youngest brother, and then we kind of lost him suddenly. But I wanted to do something special for him. My wife does a thing she belongs to this really wonderful group called Team Rubicon. They go around and they do all kinds of help, like with all kinds of natural disasters and cleaning up things and parks, and they take part every year at Arlington Cemetery and Alexandria National Cemetery. Has a huge wreath laying, and they put wreaths on all the veterans' graves. My wife does that every year, and because she's with Team Rubicon, she goes and she actually helps hand out the wreaths. Since my uncle had just been buried there, she wanted to put his wreath down, and I wanted to do something special, so I made some of these laser engraved rocks to put on top of his headstone out there. It was funny because sometimes this is how things go. Like, you do something like that, and next thing you know, you have clients bringing that kind of stuff in. So I had a client literally the day that I just finished doing a bunch of these rocks, which was the first time I had ever done memorial rocks. And I thought about doing them, for pets and different things. A client that had come in for knife sharpening before sent me a text message and said, "Hey, Paul, can you laser engrave a rock?" I said, "It's funny, you bring it up. I actually just started doing it. And I did a couple for a family thing. And yes, I can. It sometimes depends on the rock. I don't know exactly how it's going to come out. And I've had a couple that failed, but, it's possible." So he sent me a picture of it. And I had a few concerns because it was like this river rock, which have worked well, but I've had some that also didn't engrave all that well. I'll give it a shot if you want me to. And we discussed it, and he came in, he dropped off the rocks. I did them. They came out great. I'll show you the picture. But then when he came back, I was like, he didn't tell me the story. He had like names, date of birth, other names that were in Japanese on the back of the rock. And I was like, and they weren't Japanese kanji, but they were just Japanese names. And I was like, I got to get the story behind this. Like, I just done some memorial rocks, which were kind of a sad reason, but I'm like, this got to be a cool story. So he came in, and he was actually just here today to pick up the rock, and he was thrilled with it. And I was like, okay, you got to tell me what's the story of the rock? Because the one thing I said, well, we could make a cool laser engraved case or something to put the rock in. And he's like, no, that's not going to work. It's got to be on the rock, was one thing he told me when he dropped it off, but he still hadn't given me the reason why. So I found out today that they were in Japan for a while. And his wife, I don't remember exactly if it was when she was getting ready to conceive children or if she was already pregnant at the time, but there's an island where people visit in Japan, and you take a rock from there if you're pregnant or soon to be having babies or trying to conceive a child. And if you have a healthy child, you're supposed to go return there, and you write the name of the kids that you had that were healthy and everything on the rock, and you leave it there. So they were going to be returning to Japan, and they wanted to leave the names of the children on the rock. And she actually had twins. So she had healthy twins. Everything worked out great, and that's what they wanted to do. And he said, a lot of people just write it on with a Sharpie or paint it on. And he wanted to do something a little bit more special, so he wanted to see if it could be laser engraved. And that's how the laser engraving of the baby's names and date of birth on the rock came about. And I just thought that was just a cool story. And it's, one of those things that I love about being able to talk to my clients when they come in, as opposed to, like I mentioned earlier, my years as a cop, where, you're not going to get a story like that when somebody called you because someone broke into their car in their driveway. I just wanted to share that with you, and I thought that was a cool way to talk about the laser engraving, and one of the cool things that I didn't expect to come about, but there's just a lot of cool little stories like that. And a lot of times it's the stories I get from the Army unit guys that, are putting something special on a knife or one of their unit engravings or badges and different things. That's it for now. I hope you guys liked this first podcast. I want to wrap things up here. I just want to say, be flexible in your approach to starting your sharpening business. Keep in mind that, as you saw with me, what I started out doing ended up being something very different a couple years down the road. If you do that, you will be fine. And I think it's a wide open industry. I think it's a great way to make extra money on the side. If there are guys that do it full time. Like I said, a lot of times I'll see posts too from guys that are like, oh, I don't think I can make a living doing this. Yeah, you can. Look at Cliff Curry with a storefront, and look at, other people out there that have, you might need a brick and mortar store. You might need clients and customers. And I'll just touch on this on the way out of this podcast. If I wanted to do that, I would probably, if I wanted to have a lot more money, I probably would hire a kid to go to the local restaurants and collect the knives for me. And I just wouldn't be the one wasting the time waiting for the checks and collecting the knives. Could I do that? Absolutely. So there's always a way to broaden and to expand, keeping in the boundaries of what you want to do. That's it. Please like and subscribe, share the podcast if you like it. Hopefully it comes out well. Share it with others in the industry. I will have another one coming out soon. I hope this wasn't too terrible. I hope you all got something out of it. All right, so in ending the podcast, I just want to say thank you again for joining me. Please like the ALX Sharpen podcast, and if you found the episode to be valuable, please subscribe it and share it with others that might be interested in sharpening or that are in the sharpening industry. If you have ideas, I'm welcome to hear what other things you might like to hear podcasts on. Keep in mind, try and think of things that will work well in the podcast format that may not necessarily be something that you need to see me doing in the video long form format that I do with the other stuff.